lot of words that were supposed to describe this, and he's the one who did it best.
So
he will be making it out of this division as well.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, same thing I said before.
Alluded to some of the matches we're getting, because in Europe they have said, you know what, there's no time to mess around anymore. It's the
building those decks than I have when I just turn up and spout some nonsense off the top of my head. But I think the more I saw it play out, the more it makes sense. But my brain still tells me that some more aggressive cards might be effective against Mage.
Is which cards in Mage they want to take out versus the strategies they want to prepare for.
Well, here we go. Bunny versus Seiko, Mage versus Rogue. Winner gets the direct qualification match against Fino. The loser then has their tournament life on the line. BunnyHoppor going first does have the Sorcerer's Apprentice, which, I mean, it kind of goes without saying. Whether you have coin or not, Apprentice is one of the best cards in the deck, but I feel especially when you're going first, it's just a powerful option to dig you out of trouble in certain spots when you don't have that coin accentuating your game plan.
I'd say at the Masters Tour in Las Vegas, this was probably the #1 question that I was asking people is, what's the best card in Mage? You know, what card do you always want to see? What card do you always want to have? And I had a lot of answers of Sorcerer's Apprentice, but it really came to my light when I sat down with Hunter Ace to play a game. And he loads up a ladder game, and he goes through his opening hand of the mulligan, and he's clicking Mountain Giant, he's clicking Arcane Intellect, he's like, no, we don't want any of these. He's like, nope. He goes, we want Sorcerer's Apprentice. It's the best card in the deck. And he tosses away the whole hand looking for Sorcerer's Apprentice. And I was like, maybe he's overstating this to demonstrate his point. But at the end of the game when I looked up and he had won because of Sorcerer's Apprentice, that is really what told me how powerful that card was in the deck. And since I have really taken that to my heart, as we apologize for the issue here. We'll get this fixed as quickly as we can. Thank you for your patience. I started to realize how important Sorcerer's Apprentice was because of the flexibility it offered you. It offered you the ability to play for the early, the middle, or the later stages of the game, just depending on what the situation was.
Yeah, it's a very limited curve that offers the option, but sometimes Sorcerer's Apprentice just allows the Mage to curve out as a pretty aggressive aggro deck a bit more. As finally we are back in game. Just to finish the point, when you finally connect with a format like that maybe you weren't fully invested in beforehand, that is really going to improve your play.
Indeed. And so now, again, we apologize for the spectator issues. We're up and rolling here again with game #1 of BunnyHoppor versus Seiko in this one. Winner advances to face Fino, where they have 2 attempts to make it out of the group at that point. The loser of this match only has 1 chance left.
Indeed. I don't know whether this is good news or bad news, but sometimes we have issues just from our spectator client and the game was ongoing, but it looks like this one is remaining at 0-0 and there was no gameplay that you guys have missed, so take that as the silver lining if you want.
So much rides on these next couple of matches for the players, too. I mean, it's been 7 weeks of Grandmasters. We're talking 14 matches of play.
Yep.
Everything on the line now to make it to BlizzCon, to that global final. You know, this is a position where BunnyHoppor has been here a number of times in the last year. And I imagine now sitting at home, riding this wave of experience and the season that he's had where it was even for a long time in his record until he had that streak of matches that he won. This has just got to be like home field territory for him. You know, Seiko has mentioned a couple times that he's been a bit nervous in some of his matches. I imagine that BunnyHoppor has expressed that, but I don't think nearly to the same degree.
Yeah, he's mentioned specifically when he's come up against very high-level players, when he's come up against the Hunter Aces, for example, he said that he's felt the pressure of having to, you know, raise to their level or match their level, I should say, because I think he is very much already there. But BunnyHoppor on his side is very, very comfortable with this kind of situation by this point, because you said multiple championship appearances, top 4 at the World Championship, you know, seasonal championship winner. Like, this guy has done it all in competitive Hearthstone, so he can just sit back, get comfortable. You know what? I want to see him ditch the gaming chair and just pull up that little floral wingback number in the back and just get real comfortable on stream. That's what I want to see.
You know what I want to see? How Seiko's going to use these shadow steps.
This is admirable talking point #1 when it comes to Seiko. Shadow step usage with Rogue. It has baffled you.
The way that he uses shadow steps is so aggressive, and I don't know, it just seems like he's got like 9 shadow steps in the deck. Like, there's just always a couple of them, and it feels like.
Yeah.
So many games I've watched Seiko, he'd start out, kind of nothing is happening, and then you look up and you go, wait, how does he have so many minions, have dealt so much damage, and still have so many cards in hand?
Yep.
And so much of it always looks back towards one single shadow step changing the momentum of how a turn will work. And now that Spirit of the Shark has showed up, I feel like now he has a clear image of where he wants to be using these shadow steps.
Yes, I think this is a far more straightforward decision than some of the ones we have seen over the past few weeks with Seiko. It's really interesting because we asked him specifically about it in one of the interviews, and he sort of tried to explain where his head was at, but we talked about it, I think it was the next morning or maybe as we were walking home from the studio, and realized that his explanation actually didn't make any sense, which tells me that there's an instinctual thing about some of his play, which is very interesting to me, because a lot of players will tell you that you can reason out and maths out the best play on any given turn and, play like a supercomputer. But I think stuff like that goes to show that some of these players do just have to fall back on instinct sometimes and then justify the play afterwards. And more often than not, when their instinct is as finely attuned as some of these players are, that instinct still leads them down the right
path. Yeah, it comes from experience, right?
Yes.
I always hate to make sports references on anything, but one of the biggest tournament chokes of all time was held by a golf player who they had such a big lead going into the final day, they just thought to themselves, okay, just don't mess up and we win. And so they thought about every single shot that they took, and it's like the biggest choke of all time. When you have a certain level of understanding and mastery, you need to just let that instinct take over and really let it drive home how you're going to play the game. And I very much am in that category of I need to play instinctually. If I think too much about something, it ends up becoming bad. And so very much I have to reflect on what happened after I've made a play and then let my experience guide me from there. So if I'm going to play good in a situation, I need to have made the mistakes that are necessary in the games before the one that really mattered when it comes to competition point. And given Seiko's explanation and what you just said, that does feel like a lot of how he plays, because he will tend to sometimes play very quickly, which tells me he knows what to do in the situation. He's been here before.
Right. Meanwhile, BunnyHoppor, not too much going on this turn. Arcane Intellect really the only viable option. He's just kind of missing himself some kind of base to build from. He hasn't really had that smooth curve of the early minions, and he hasn't really been able to get his hand size up to the point where he can get a quick giant plan going. But he's not really under too much pressure just yet from Seiko. Seiko, as we were describing it, did that Seiko thing where he has played for tempo, but yet somehow still has 9 cards in his hand.
Yeah, and he's going to keep playing for tempo and somehow still have 9 cards in his hand. It's a mystery.
Evil miscreant, my dude. It does good things.
It's a riddle wrapped in a... What's that big saying with the riddle and enigma and mystery thing?
Yeah, you had it.
Goes.
Riddle wrapped in an enigma, I think that's right.
It's a mystery wrapped in a riddle.
Sure.
Inside. I don't know. Something about enigmas at the end. So now BunnyHoppor's faced with the decision where I feel like Seiko being able to get a 4-5 off of this evolve was a major deal, because BunnyHoppor, I think, was looking towards that Luna's Pocket Galaxy.
Yeah.
And I think likely lands there because his 7 is Mountain Giant Conjurer's Calling. But that is a slow turn when you're looking at a Spirit of the Shark.
It's a slow turn when you're looking at just 7 damage in play as well, which is your point about that 4-5 being very relevant. I think this has become quite key against the deck. It always was. You always needed to keep pressure high against Mage so they can't just freely drop Giants and feel good about it. But since Luna's Pocket Galaxy came into the deck, the idea of just power spiking, pressuring into key turns, when you have a read that Luna's Pocket Galaxy is something they want to do, became even bigger. Because if you just take a turn off, if you just have a very slow value-based turn and don't put huge pressure on the board, they will rip that Luna's Pocket Galaxy for very little punish. And it's so hard to come back from that position if they've done it in a safe spot. And that just kind of illustrates the point. BunnyHoppor thinks that effect is so potentially powerful that he's like, you know what? There's nothing I can do about this 7 damage. I'm just going to take 7 and just set this up for future turns.
Wow. Something about this card just scares me. I look at when it's played against a deck or a board that has no pressure, and I'm like, wow, that's one of the best plays you can make.
Yeah.
I see it played against a board that has pressure, and I go, wow, is that even good enough? What a strangely powerful card, where it prompts your opponent to just be as aggressive as they can. And even in the face of that, you go, you know what? I just don't have anything better to do.
Yeah.
The minions cost 1.
Just give them the slow clap. All right, you did the right thing. You pressured me. I'm going to do it anyway. What now?
I wonder.
More pressure?
Seems like it.
Damage plus damage plus damage.
The best combo. It goes back to Boston's point from a couple of weeks ago, where we were asking him about Luna's Pocket Galaxy and why it wasn't in his deck, and he said, with this deck, I always feel like I have better things to do by spending 5 than just passing my turn and taking a bunch of pressure, essentially. But I think most other players tend to agree that the upside of Luna's Pocket Galaxy just massively outweighs that one-turn tempo loss on the turn it comes.
It's a percentage play.
Yeah,
You're looking for future payoff. And BunnyHoppor here is going to have to look for some pretty major payoff right now. You know, in Game 1, I feel like the Giants are a bit more secure. You're looking at Backstab, Vendetta, SI7 Agent, Waggle Pick, and Lackeys. Those are the sources of damage. In Games 2 and 3, you know, you're thinking about Walk the Plank. You're thinking about Betrayal and how your boards get set up against it. The dance of building board tension and freezing your opponent out, much easier in the first game than it is in the following.
For sure. And even that Eviscerate that Seiko is bringing in to his secondary deck to be anti-mage, like, but we're talking about it in terms of damage and pressure, it's still a very efficient removal card if you do need to kill a giant and you don't have one of the perfect answers available. You know, look at 0 mana Vendetta plus an Eviscerate. Boom, your giant's gone.
I mean, I feel like the turn here is giant. I just am really struggling to see what else BunnyHoppor can have in this spot.
Runs out on me.
I mean, is he cooking up a play where Arcane Intellect to try to draw into a giant, play the giant in Arcane... I'm sorry, Conjurer's Calling is better. Is he looking at Halftime Scavenger to build a board and look to Sea Giant the next turn? I was about to say...
He's in a rough position as well. So like with Mage, you've always got to think about potential high rolls from your deck. So, for example, he has a 1-mana Khadgar in his deck that if that comes out and he's still held on to his Mountain Giant, that can win the game even up against this kind of board state that he's really unable to deal with. So there's all type of things to be considered there. The Sea Giant is rough because Sea Giant offers you far, far less defensive options than Mountain Giant does. Mountain Giant 50% of the time gets you a huge taunt. Sea Giant has to find Big Bad Archmage into a 6-mana taunt, which is massively unlikely.
And so, kind of what I just heard is that it feels like Rogue is favored because they have damage and ways to remove a big minion.
I did not say that.
But that's kind of what the gist of what you gave to me was, is you need to have defensive minions, or otherwise you just die.
To clarify, I am very much in the camp that this matchup is extremely even when it comes to a primary style deck versus a primary style deck.
Okay. What would you say about this situation?
This is bad. Really, really bad.
For whom?
For BunnyHoppor.
Okay. Because it feels really bad right now.
Yeah.
I feel like BunnyHoppor using a freeze and not being able to absolutely swing the game as a result of it means that he's just going to end up in a worse and worse spot as the game progresses.
Interesting. Just dumps the Cold Blood for hand space concerns, but putting it on the Shark. How do you feel about that as a target in general?
Well, that was the one that couldn't attack, and now it can.
Right.
That's my thought.
Sure, but is it not already a high priority target on the board even when it doesn't have 4 attack? Is it not better to put the Cold Blood on something that's less priority to spread the threats out?
Maybe Psycho's done with it.
Okay.
Maybe he's tired of that Shark. Book of Spectre's a lot better when your deck costs 1.
Ooh,
but they
yikes.
gotta be minions.
They sure do. And now Bunny finds himself stuck.
And perhaps that's the reason you don't spread it out. You want your opponent to have to Ray of Frost for less overall value.
Yeah, I think looking at it in the face of exactly Ray of Frost, it does start to make some sense because double Ray of Frost this way leaves a significant amount of attack on the board, whereas you don't want to put Cold Blood on a 1-1 because it can just get pinged off and you lose value. So your other 2 options are then a 3-3 or a 4-5. So if you had put Cold Blood on either of those 2 targets, double Ray of Frost freezes those 2 targets and you have almost no damage on board. So Seiko is absolutely correct in the way that he did it there. That makes a ton of sense.
He's dealt 14 damage. He's killed just about every minion that BunnyHoppor's played. And he's still got 10 cards in hand.
You're never going to let this one go, are you?
Where are they coming from? I don't understand.
He's had a Shark in play the entire game. What do you expect?
It just doesn't feel like this should be the case. Like, I play this deck, I run out of cards on turn 4, and my opponent's at like 36, and I'm at like 12. I feel like everyone who's played Rogue and hasn't just been one of the best at the game, it knows what I'm talking about, where you just run out of stuff and you're like,
yep.
I don't understand. My opponents always have everything, and I look down at my board, and I'm like, please, can I draw a Blink Fox?
Right.
I just don't get it. Like, I get it, but I don't. That's the point I'm making.
Good talk.
He would have had 12 cards in hand if it was possible this turn.
Seiko fills board here, not a big deal because he does still have a Shadow Step available if he draws something that needs to hit the board if a Frost Nova comes down, but that is something that you do always want to look out for the matchup. He does know that he sapped a Sea Giant here, though, so that is a little bit frightening in terms of the second Sea Giant, but Bunny is going to rip the Doomsayer out, and we don't even get to see it. Curse you, spectator mode. But I assure you, if Bunny conceded there, the Doomsayer did not.
And I agree that it's fairly close. The difference is that 2 weeks of play, we saw it go to a 20% difference in game win rate. And now, granted, the sample size is quite small for Hearthstone. You need a lot of games of Hearthstone to know what that data actually looks like. But it continues to trend in favor of a massive difference when you can change up to 5 cards and your opponent cannot.
Yeah, I mean, that's what was interesting to me. I called that out where I said, you know, this is just based off week 6 statistics, right? We have a very small sample size, but it's an interesting thing to talk about. Then when we've added in, when we essentially doubled the sample size, the win rate shift when players switch to a dedicated anti-something deck has gone up.
That's bad news for BunnyHoppor.
Look out for it. Season 2, keep an eye on it, because I think these secondary and tertiary decks are only going to get better as we move into Season 2.
And so now BunnyHoppor's got coin. This is the territory Mage really wants to be in, taking advantage of extra hand size and extra cards. I feel like if there's one deck that does so much with extra cards in comparison to everything else, it has to be Cyclone Mage.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's just the engine that their car runs off, right? Like, they just need cards in hand because, A, it allows you to do more oppressive things with Sorcerer's Apprentice when you have a handful of cheap spells. It allows you to turn those cheap, low-impact spells into big, high-impact spells of a Mana Cyclone, if that's your option. And then just the very surface level. You play Mountain Giant in your deck. You want to have a ton of cards in your hand.
Yeah, I feel like for Seiko, you just want to have any other cards in your hand as well.
That is about as poor as it gets right now. Yeah. The Edwin offers some kind of ray of light through the crack in the window, but Walk the Plank, very reactive card. Togwaggle way too slow. Leroy Jenkins is your finisher. It means BunnyHoppor, this is going to be the polar opposite of what we saw in the first game, where BunnyHoppor is going to have, first of all, complete freedom to do whatever he wants because he's not going to be under significant pressure unless there's a big Edwin draw that changes that off the top. And secondly, he has multiple game plans being projected to him by the contents of his hand.
Yeah, and that to me is the first point is the big one. No pressure that you're under right now.
Yep.
You know, Walk the Plank is a great card when you have damage cranking. If you don't have damage cranking, that Walk the Plank is going, oh my goodness, I hope they don't have another giant.
Yes.
Like, that's what that starts to say at that point. And so for BunnyHoppor, you look at the way his hand is panning out, 2 Arcane Intellects in a row is going to give him a high potential to be able to make something happen. And so Snip Snap showing up may change the way this game plan works out. But right now, BunnyHoppor's eyes looking at that Mana Cyclone and Sorcerer's Apprentice and saying, what else can I do with this?
Someone else looking at a hand and going, what on earth can I do with this is Seiko right now, because there is just nothing going on except a singular 3-mana 2/2.
Yeah.
So many
and I think that the look on his face is, you saw him kind of shift his eyes over to the side and go, what am I supposed to...
Yeah?
Yeah, it's appropriate right now. This is one of the worst opening collections of cards I think you could draw.
Worth going back and looking at Bunny's turn as well. He chose not to tempo out the Apprentice, which is a turn that we've been seeing very commonly from a lot of players because it plays into that backstab miscreant dynamic that we talked about in the lead into the series. Chose to coin AI because he has a lot of upside in his draws right now. He can find Elemental Evocation to then give him an insane Mana Cyclone turn on the following turns. He can find Mountain Giant in a hand that contained 2 Arcane Intellects. There's just so much upside to him for drawing cards right now. So coin AI definitely is the best of both worlds in terms of counterplay versus what your opponent wants to do, but also just maximizing your own game plan.
And what does this Edwin tell BunnyHoppor about Psycho's hand right now as well? You know,
I wonder.
Psycho's going to have little to no information about what's going on with BunnyHoppor's hand. And I feel like when BunnyHoppor sees this, you kind of look up and go, well, there's no Fairy Dragon. Mm-hmm. There was no Blink Fox. There's no SI7 agent. Like, what is the hand right now? It feels like it's exactly what it is at that point.
I think Bunny reaches the right conclusion in the face of that information, which is, all right, I'm just going to get on with my job and work this out later. Like, I don't think that 2-2 really changes Bunny's plan of coin AI into AI, so he doesn't necessarily have to worry about it a great deal.
And so now there was no Hench Clan Burglar, there was no Life Drinker, there was no Waggle Pick, there was no Spirit of the Shark. The only cards left that it could really be are Backstab, Shadow Step, Sap, Vendetta.
Ziliax,
Ziliax is out of the deck.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
So
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm looking at the primary.
Togwaggle, Walk the Plank, Eviscerate, and Betrayal. Like, it literally can start to be deduced to almost this exact hand.
Yeah, it's the removal cards and then a couple of specific minions, which in this case are the minions that he does have. So in that case, like, where is your head at as BunnyHoppor? Because I don't think, like, playing a giant here and getting it dealt with no pressure behind that is necessarily the worst thing in the world, right? Like, he just has the freedom to do this. Even if there is a handful of removal, he will overwhelm that removal eventually.
So here's the thing. A, you start getting the removal out of the way because you have excess stuff right now. B, if Seiko draws a minion, he doesn't necessarily have the freedom to play it.
Also, importantly, if BunnyHoppor plays a giant here and it's a removal turn from Seiko, look at the dynamic that then's created. BunnyHoppor goes back to his turn with no pressure on the board because Seiko spent his whole turn removing a giant, and he has Luna's Pocket Galaxy for 5 in his hand.
Yeah, and so, again, you kind of look at the payoff that BunnyHoppor gets in this. It's twofold. Number one less walk the plank. Number two, no pressure added. That's exactly what happened to Seiko here. He used his premium removal spell, and then he drew a minion that he couldn't play on that turn.
Right.
So BunnyHoppor using that Mountain Giant, even if he knows it's going to die, if Seiko's hand is face up in that spot, you probably play the Giant. You know, this to me was a good example of hand reading and how it matters, because the best players in the world are doing that to a very subtle level, where the smallest of details in one of your missteps can tell them a lot more about your hand than when it's as obvious as this situation for BunnyHoppor.
So now, this is actually a tougher decision for Bunny than I made it sound. Obviously, Luna's on 5, beautiful. You know, you sign me up. But the second Mountain Giant, because of that dynamic we have where Seiko is only playing a single copy of Walk the Plank, Bunny can actually, even if he's giving credit to this hand being full of removal from Seiko, can actually still imagine a world where his giant lives, right? Because Sap is the only card that deals with it. Betrayal would do nothing. It would have to be Vendetta plus something else in order to take care of it. And I feel like Bunny, potentially, if he gets the second giant down here, can win the game. But he's going another way entirely, something that I didn't even look at. He's going for the Sorcerer's Apprentice turn instead, just maximizing out onto the board. What's the merit of this, Admiral?
So my thinking on this is BunnyHoppor probably wants to, again, prompt Seiko to do something. And the Mountain Giant, as you mentioned, it's only checked by pretty specific things. And so when I'm looking at this, what it says to me is he wants the option of Mana Cyclone or the option of Mountain Giant into Conjurer's Calling next turn.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the only way to really create that, is to get the Sorcerer's Apprentice into play so that you could have that threat of the Mana Cyclone being pretty explosive in this spot.
That's fair.
This also starts to eliminate the hand range from Seiko, where BunnyHoppor can further identify it. And even in the worst case scenario, BunnyHoppor is looking at having Mountain Giant Conjurer's Calling on the following turn. Now, the Betrayal, I think, is really where that Seiko has the potential to get that payoff, is the fact that if BunnyHoppor lands on that big turn, Betrayal can answer the whole thing.
You have a lot more faith in Betrayal than I do, Admirable. Let's just leave it at that.
It's like a 2-mana Walk the Plank.
Yeah, sure.
I love it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, if Lunas had come down that turn, he does still have Giant Conjurer's Calling as the follow-up. But I think you make an interesting point that this is the play that he makes that gives him the option of doing either on the following turn, which I think is a really nice way of looking at it. I think if he, unless he'd drawn exactly Elemental Evocation off the top after the Luna's Pocket Galaxy, which is not the world you want to live in anyway, like, you didn't really have an effective Cyclone turn. So I like this the more that I look at it. I think you explained it well.
When the hand reading parts are obvious, that's when it becomes so much easier for me. So when they're not so obvious. If I can't explain how you know a card is there, I don't want to even attempt to explain how. Does that make sense?
I didn't understand a word you just said.
Okay, so I cast with Firebat quite a bit a couple years ago, and Firebat is one of the American Grandmasters, former world champion. He's like the best hand reader that I've ever spoken with.
For sure. Top tier, for sure.
And he has just the cleanest way of explaining how you figure out a card's in an opponent's hand. And when he just explained, I'm like, how do you know that? And how does it now make sense that you've said it? Because you've said it so quickly. I can't do that unless it's super obvious, like this situation was this game. And so for BunnyHoppor, he was able to figure that out, pretty quickly and obviously, because it was quite obvious from his perspective. And he's just making option plays around that.
Right.
To me, it just I couldn't even imagine a world last turn where he wanted to plop another giant, just given he wants to just Seiko to expend everything first.
Yeah.
Once he's expended everything, what's he going to do then?
The cruel joke of Mage is that the deck then handed Bunny even more options by giving him Stargazer Luna off the top with 2 bananas immediately on the right-hand side of the hand after that.
Yeah, no option here.
But hard to be diverted off that plan.
I am extremely tempted to Shadow Step.
Yeah.
I figured out how he uses it. He has a minion and he has Shadow Step.
I have a live target for this card. I mean, saying that, he did, I believe, end the game last game with a Shadow Step in his hand that was unused.
Did we want to make it more complicated?
Yes, sign me up. Sign me up. Yeah. Sounds good. I actually think that simplifies the turn quite a lot. That really makes it clear what your turn is here.
The tools of creation.
Hello?
Apologize.
Do I not get a card? Okay.
Behold the tools of creation.
Well, the Rare Frost is for sure happening.
Yeah. I think Seiko acting appropriately in response to that as well. Or, oh, okay. Well, that was one of the cards I needed your 10 cards to not be.
Yeah, BunnyHoppor being responsible this turn. He's already played way too many cards in terms of maxing out his hand size. So he goes and just drops the Mana Cyclone to fill up his hand and then plays the banana afterwards to make sure that he has upside draws from the rest of his deck.
Yeah, this is this hand's it's not good. Seiko has been on the opposite end of last game's pan out, where instead of options he has,
I wonder.
I'd say close to no options.
He has had very close to 1 play available to him each turn that, has any kind of justifiable merit behind it.
And so looking at that, when I have Waggle pick set up and I have Leroy, my head always looks towards how can I win the game with this? Because that's a lot of damage.
It sure is.
I wonder.
But you can't control where the Waggle pick sets. So perhaps time is just the way you go.
Too soon.
That looks about right to me.
This guy's toast.
Continue a bit of the battle for the board.
It's worth knowing as well that Bunny is quite light in terms of defensive options that can protect him for Leroy. He doesn't have mirror images in hand right now, and he's down both Mountain Giants, which leaves him in a position where, Grave Horror Taunts just aren't an option in the game anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that is something to be said, I think, is that with the Mountain Giants gone, you do limit your defensive measures by quite a bit. And so BunnyHoppor has to find a way to keep some amount of aggression going. Seiko's at 15, so he's not too far off of some attack turns. You couple anything with Frost Novas and you're looking at those minions representing lethal, but his hand is just kind of garbage.
Yep.
It's just a bunch of stuff, really. I think to that Sorcerer's Apprentice turn, and I liked it, but what else could have happened?
Well, yeah, I was almost about to go and look back at the exact same turn. Definitely those 2 to 3 turns around that period of kind of what defined how this hand has panned out. Because his Mana Cyclone turn that he ended up with was actually quite inefficient when you look at it. He had to deliberately take a bad one in order not to burn cards. And he's also had a huge Luna's turn where he, smashed through his deck without having Luna's Pocket Galaxy active as well. Like, is that a situation he could have created? Mage is hard. There's always options.
That's an option.
Big outcome off the 3s as well.
So 10 from hand now for Seiko, with 4 connecting this turn from minions. He's 5 damage away. I see a 6-mana 5/5 in hand.
I see a 6-mana 5/5 on the board, because I'm living in the future. I mean, the 5/5 isn't doing much good on the board if you don't at least give it some element of protection, right?
I felt like the 6/6 is protecting the 5/5 if we're going to go that route.
All right.
I mean, you got to kill the 6/6 first, right? I think Seiko is right in his train of thought here, though, where he's, thinking the exact same thing I just explained. I'm only a few attacks away from dying. I need to stop damage, so that way a single freeze might not end the game.
Right.
However, when you couple it with Khadgar, that single freeze definitely represents ending the game.
Wow. It's the 3/4s again. BunnyHoppor crushing these 3-drop rolls.
And that's no outs for Seiko. There's nothing in this deck that'll change this spot.
Nope. With Vanish rotated, accentuating that issue.
Wow, if that Eviscerate went face!
How much damage went to minions? Yeah.
If that Eviscerate went face!
Yep. I was going to bring it up because when you said, he needs 5 damage, he has very few cards remaining in his deck at that point that offer him that damage. So I think it's an interesting decision to look at, as it always is when, the one card comes off the top that makes your decision look stupid. But I really need to hammer that point home that it doesn't change the decision. One individual result does not change whether a decision was right or wrong.
Yeah.
Game number 3. Huge stakes. Seiko versus Bunny, both of them remaining on the same deck as they were previously. Seiko with his version of the deck with an Eviscerate coming in alongside the Fairy Dragons and the removal cards to come up against Mage. Bunny with the same old Mage he's been running since game 1. Again, winner of this progresses forward to then have 2 bites at the cherry to make their way out. The loser will then have their tournament life on the line in their very next series.
Going back over to Seiko, and a much different opening hand as well for him, where there's minions that you can play.
Whoa! That's a novel concept.
And so this is the classic battle now. Can BunnyHoppor's deck fend off the generic value pressure that Rogue wants to apply?
Generic value pressure.
Hey, Blink Fox,
I
SI7
like that.
agent.
Yeah, kind of like it.
To me, this is one of the most Rogue decks that we've had in a long time, where Rogue feels like, by nature of the class of rogues, they're going to try to get scrappy victories.
Yeah.
If an SI agent sneaks into your building and gets in a scuffle with you, they're going to try to grab whatever tools they can and try to hit you with them, right? You've caught the SI7 agent. They're trying to break in and steal your stuff. They're just going to grab what you have laying around and seeing what they can do with it.
Right.
Sometimes he picks up a Pyroblast scroll that's sitting on the table. Sometimes they find, a Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Sometimes you just had a burning mass of 10 damage fire in your apartment that was just lying around that they picked up and threw at you for some reason.
You played like in Oblivion, like Skyrim World and stuff. You have the scrolls or whatever.
Okay.
That's like the Blink Fox. The Blink Fox just comes back with a thing, and you're like, what is this?
I'm struggling flavor-wise to reconcile SI7 agent into that world, though. I think that's kind of what I'm...
That's like the iconic rogue thing, right?
This guy's toast.
But no, I'm very much with you. I have always been a fan of these kind of weird rogue decks. It's usually the first thing I build in every expansion, going back to just... I had a deck that just had, Loot Hoarders and Undercity Valiants and things. You just played for tempo and you had cards in your hand because all of your stuff drew a card or generated something when you played it, and you just kept going and kept going and kept going and being efficient.
And speaking of playing for tempo, BunnyHoppor opted for the 2-mana Cyclone. Just played it.
Yep.
Thoughts?
I'm okay with it because he has the second one in hand, and I think in that spot with coin from the opponent, you're not really too worried about backstab implications. We talked about Bunny's dynamic where he said, if a 2/2 gets backstabbed in this matchup, that's good for the mage player because it's a backstab out of the hand that can then deal with a more high functional threat. And I guess SI7 has the same kind of dynamic. If neither of those cards are present, you get a payoff where you can then start to contest 3/3s from the opponent with just your 2/2 and a ping.
I mentioned last week, I remember I said something to the degree of board control would play this Mana Cyclone here. He promptly messaged me and said, I would not have played the Mana Cyclone, here's why. And he listed a number of recent options, which I was certain he was going to do.
That is peak ball control. That is the most ball control thing I've ever heard.
I really wanted him to tweet about it, because that was the whole point, was prompt him to discuss the mastery required in order to understand why you should play your 2-mana card on turn 2.
Right.
And then BunnyHoppor this week, I was going to mention how board control told me not to play the Mana Cyclone because of XYZ, and then watching him do it, and I was like, Sottle, I just don't know sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, Mage is hard. I will come back to that over and over again. And people, you know, even people who sound like they're certain what the right play is, they don't know. The deck's too hard. There's too many variables. There's, you know, too many X factors to come into play at any given time.
I'll take confidence backed up by reason.
Yeah, 100%. Yes.
I'll call you right in that situation.
Yeah, sure. You're convincing enough.
Wow, no Luna before this. So he wants to Luna after he plays her Pocket Galaxy.
This is certainly an interesting game plan, a big diversion from the norm for BunnyHoppor, where he's just trying to fight as aggressively, as he can up into that turn 5, and then potentially get the payoff that way with so many of his big impact minions left in his deck. Just so happens that Seiko just has a nicely balanced hand this game. We saw first game, he had all the pressure and none of the removal because it wasn't in his deck. Game number 2, he had all the removal, all the clunky minions, and none of the pressure. This game, he just has a perfect balance of the two, where it is that dynamic that we've talked about so many times. It's minion pressure, then backed up by that removal. And in Seiko's case, even better, because that removal is doubling up as burn in this situation.
Oh, my. Oh, my. That's game. It's not this turn, but that's game. How is BunnyHoppor going to defend that?
It's a great question. It's a lot of Frost Novas and a lot of mirror images, and I don't think there's enough of them in the deck to get the job done.
It's 9 in play. You have 6 on the Leroy, and you have 7 more in burn with the Frostbolt and Eviscerate.
I know this is dangerous territory, Admirable, but do you just play the Leroy now? I'm actually pretty confident about this. Like, you play, because it beats Ziliax anyway, right? Like, Ziliax is the only out in this position, apart from just random conjurers calling Scammery.
Okay, Luna, Sea Giant, draw Snip Snap, and draw Ziliax. That's the way he lives, is that right?
How much mana do you have this turn?
Your minions cost 1.
Does that still work though? I guess if they're the immediate
Luna's
draws,
3,
yeah, if they're the immediate draws, then it's fine. Yeah, okay, sure.
And this was the play that BunnyHoppor set up. That's why he played for the Mana Cyclone Pressure, is he wanted to just get something on board, kill a minion with something he had on board, and he ran into 2 removal instead. And so the Snip Snap gets this is the world.
If you've called this out and it happens, I am going to burn you as a witch.
The tools of creation.
Not it.
You win.
He's just cooked. Wow. Yep.
Seiko takes it down 2 games to 1 and moves on to now have 2 tries at making it